Hey, good afternoon, everybody. And well, we're cruising. We're cruising through our ReefYARNS. We're up to number 4, investing in sea country futures. My name's Mel Mann. I'm the Director for Programs and Engagement with ReefTO. I'm Darrinbal fella dialing in from Darrinbal country, and certainly an honour and a privilege to be in this space. And we'll kick off with our acknowledgement. So on behalf of ReefTO, we definitely acknowledge the traditional owners of the Great Barrier Reef and its catchment, and the deep and ongoing connection to sea country, and certainly acknowledge and honour the work of our forebears, those gone on before us, our elders and traditional owners that have come before us and tirelessly advocated for our inherent rights and interests and obligations to protect and care for sea country and continue to lead in its stewardship today. Just to set the scene, this is not a new conversation about our interest in establishing a ReefTO Alliance. It's been happening for some time, but rather today represents the next step, and I'm really excited to be a part of this, and a lot of others too that have been sharing in this space for some time. And today really demonstrates that we are serious about operationalising the vision that has come out of all these yarns over the years, and even more recently through our engagements as part of this work. And so, yes, today's focus is around investing in sea country futures, and it marks a significant shift. So as we also reflect on the past, we recognise that much has happened, both for and against mob in sea country spaces. But this conversation isn't just about the past alone, it's about how we invest in the space into the future. So I'm really excited about how important this once-in-a-generation opportunity is. It is significant. And over the past 15 months, we've been out engaging with mob, we've been listening, we've been learning, working with mob through this process, and we've arrived at a draft leading model. And one of the key questions coming through, and we now face, is that financial side. So how do we resource this? How do we sustain this vision moving forward? And so, well, as part of the welcome, so we'll go to the next slide. So without further ado, just want to welcome those of you that have joined us online. And also, I just want to circle around to speakers here today as well, who will introduce themselves. We've got online Emma, Chris, and Michalia. If you just want to just introduce yourselves and where you're dialing in from, your role, and that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. Maybe I'll just quickly kick off. Thanks very much, Mel. My name's Emma Pethybridge. I'm the General Manager with ReefTO. So, I'm dialing in from Meanjin, Brisbane, on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people. And I work very closely with the task force and with the whole coordination unit team within ReefTO, and also our host organisation, Pollination Foundation. So I'm sort of stepping in today for Dwayne Fraser, who is one of our co-chairs on the task force, who is travelling today and wasn't able to make it. So very excited to be talking about this, because it's a topic that's very close to my heart, I suppose, and a very important one for the future of the ReefTO Alliance.
Thanks, Em. I'll jump in. Kapugoiga, good day, everyone. My name is Michalia. I'm a Torres Strait Islander woman and the Director of Comms and Creative here at ReefTO. I'll be working behind the scenes to operate the presentation today, but also moderating any questions that come through in the chat for our Q&A piece a little bit later in the presentation. Thank you so much for being here and joining our ReefYARNS series. Really looking forward to diving into this topic a little bit more today. And over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Mish. Thanks, Emma and Mel, and thanks for having me here today. Chris Wilson, I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, down in not-so-sunny Melbourne. I am a partner in a private wealth management firm called Coda Capital. We're Australia's largest independent wealth management firm, and we specialise in working with community organisations, non-profit groups, philanthropic foundations. And we've been brought in to support the Alliance in establishing the Futures Fund to help it invest successfully, not just for today, but for generations to come. And looking forward to talking more about that as we get into the Q&A later on with Mel. But great to meet everyone.
Thank you. Thanks to our speakers there. And just before we begin, this presentation will go for 45 minutes, and there'll be an opportunity at the back end, around about 10 minutes for questions. And so this session will be recorded and it'll be shared on the ReefTO website. The cameras on is optional, and we have muted microphones for all participants just to avoid background noise. If you do run into any technical issues, try refreshing your screen or rejoining the session. And if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to put them into the Q&A chat, and we'll facilitate those at the back end of this session here. And similarly, if you've got issues with that chat, to email us at engage@reefto.au. That's engage@reefto.au. And we'll facilitate those questions. We also follow the ReefTO gathering protocol, which is really important around ensuring that this space is safe to have this conversation, and respectfully those that have been holding this space for some time, so that we could mobilise ourselves to get to this really important point. So it's important that we are respectful toward each other as we move with creating some really important change into the future. So, and as the line says there, if there was ever a time for us to come together, that time is now. If there was ever a time for the voice of traditional custodians to be heard, this is that time. Heart of the Reef, it's a call for healing. Just a warning as well that some of the slides here may contain people who have passed, so we do this work in their honour. Thank you. So yes, today's Reef Yarn is that it's, what is the Futures Fund? And we'll look to explore the endowment funds with Coda Capital, and an opportunity here, and I'll ask some questions to our speakers here today. But just to recap on where we've come from so far, with our session number 1, it was about why we need an alliance, and then session 2 was about that we explored the 7 alliance building blocks and what we heard from Mob, and the last session 3, was that we explored the ReefTO Alliance leading model, which is now open for formal comment for Mob until 30th of June, and it's located on our website, so feel free to provide your feedback to that. So today we're going to talk about the Futures Fund, what it is, why we need it, and what the benefits are. So with our special guest here, Chris from Coda Capital, joining us today for the Q&A session on the endowment funds, but also how to grow that kind of fund, what the risks are that we need to be mindful about, and what good governance funds or governance of those funds look like. So you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions at the end. But first, I'd like to hand over to Emma, who'll set the scene to talk about the Futures Fund. Thanks, Emma.
No worries. Yep. Thanks, Mel. All right. So yeah, we've been, as you probably know, if you've been following the ReefTO journey for a little while, we've been out engaging with traditional owners of the Great Barrier Reef from the south, from Bundaberg in the south, all the way up to Torres Strait in the north since about March last year, which kicked off with our Sea Country Forum that we held in Gimoy in Cairns in March last year. So I guess, as we've been understanding what traditional owners want the alliance to look like, we've at the same time been really trying to unpack and explore what resources it will need to function. Because as we go along and we hear about the big vision for what the alliance could do to support the future of reef traditional owners, and what the purpose and functions of it could be. We don't want to set that up for failure, in the sense that we want to make sure it's got a sustainable foundation for funding into the future. So what we've really tried to unpack here is what resources it's going to need to function, and how it's funded is really important as well, because where money comes from has a big impact on the independence of an organisation and how it can speak on behalf of traditional owners. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more later on. But if I could just go to the next slide, perhaps. What we've been doing is working with some of our funding partners, I suppose, to establish, well, we're looking to establish what we're calling the Futures Fund. So there's $30 million that's been committed to this if and when the Alliance gets stood up. So there's $10 million committed by the Australian government, and that's currently held by DQ. There's $10 million committed by the Queensland government, which is also held by DQ at the moment, the Australian government, that is. And there's $10 million committed with GBRF, and that's held by GBRF right now. So there's $30 million that's been committed for the future Alliance when it stood up. So we don't hold those funds. ReefTO doesn't have access to those funds right now. It will only be released when the Alliance is set up and when the proper protections are in place, like the good governance pieces, the risk management and investment structures and things like that, to make sure that that money is used for its intended purpose and to make sure it's protected for the long term. And that's where Coda Capital, Chris from Coda Capital comes in, because we've been engaging and working with Coda Capital as a really, I suppose, best practice investment fund manager out there to help us set those things up. So help us explore the governance and administration of what the Futures Fund could be and how we set it up to get the best return on investment for to fund the Alliance, but also to make sure that traditional owners are still having full control over that fund as well. Next slide, if we could. So I guess, as part of this process, what we really wanted to be clear on is the three main benefits of the Futures Fund, as it relates to the Alliance. And one is that the first one, I think, which is a really big and important point, is that it could enable the Alliance to operate independently. So when we're talking about that amount of money, and we'll get Chris to go into a bit more detail about this in a moment, but when that kind of money is set up and invested into markets, then the annual return on that capital is a source of independent funds for the Alliance. So what that means is that core operating funding means it's no strings attached. And so if the Alliance wants to question government, which is one of the things we've heard through the engagement process that traditional owners want the Alliance to do, is to be able to criticise government in some cases, to be able to ask those sort of difficult questions and, start to position for systems change and big policy reform and things like that. We want to be able to do that without worrying about being silenced or having funding cut off. So this allows that in perpetuity kind of source of core operating funding, means that the Alliance can do that without worrying about being silenced. So that's a really, I think, perhaps one of the most important points, really. The second one is the keeping the lights on in perpetuity. So as anyone knows who's sort of run an organisation or even tried to fundraise through grants and things like that, it's really hard to sometimes find unrestricted funding for sort of core administration and core, sort of the boring back of house kind of costs, I suppose. So a lot of funders like to fund the new and exciting programs and things like that, but it can be really hard to find and secure funding for those core operating costs. So what this means is that that annual return on investment that's kind of secured means that the Alliance can plan confidently and with freedom to plan its own and chart its own future, I guess, and not worry about those core costs to operate. The third piece, I should say, is not competing with local groups for funding. So that's been one of our core principles all along, and that we've really re-emphasised and reheard, I suppose, through the regional dialogues and the engagement process, is that we shouldn't be setting this alliance up to compete with local groups for funding sources. So we don't want to get in the way of of funding when it's available. So this allows us again to make sure that those core costs are covered. And then if there are things that that the member organisations of the Alliance want the Alliance to go and seek grants for and support, for the collective benefit of all reef traditional owners, that's another thing. But what this means is that we don't have to compete for just keeping the lights on. So it's very exciting, I suppose, that we've engaged Coda Capital to help us shape how that can be best geared for that future sort of sustainable footing into the future for the Alliance, and make sure we're protecting that capital, investing it in the right ways, but also making sure it's that traditional owners still have the cultural authority and final sort of decision making around those funds as well. I might pause there and hand back to you, Mel, for the next piece. Yeah.
Thanks, Emma, for talking us through the Futures Fund. We're now going to have a yarn with Chris from Coda Capital about these kinds of funds in more detail. All right. So endowment funds. So what is an endowment fund, Chris?
Question, Mel.
Yes. Yes.
So an endowment fund is essentially a pool of money that is invested for the long term, where you're looking to generate income year on year. And that income goes to support often an underlying organisation like the Alliance. As Emma's rightly pointed to, it can be a really powerful tool for an organisation like an Alliance in allowing it to operate independently, in allowing it to fund the things that are important to it and not to others, and not being reliant on government or corporate funding or philanthropy or other means of funding, which may all be important in the long run. But what it does is it provides you this reliable income stream to support the organisation really into perpetuity. The main goal of an endowment is to really do two things. One is to create that income stream off it by investing into investment markets. And the second is to grow the original amount that you've invested as well. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So for the Futures Fund, we're looking like we're going to be starting with $30 million. $30 million sounds like a lot of money today, and it is. But if you fast forward 50 years, 100 years, what $30 million will get you will be a lot less than it will get you today, because the price of things continues to go up. And that's called inflation, and any of us that are buying petrol or doing grocery shopping will feel the impact of inflation and those rising costs. So one of the important things that an endowment needs to do is to actually grow the amount that's invested so that it can continue to buy the things that it needs to buy, whilst also generating that income stream. So they're really the two functions of an endowment.
Yeah, good one. Can you give us an example of an endowment fund, Chris, that's working well for a similar organisation, and what's made it successful?
Yeah, absolutely. So a good example, not necessarily exact like for you, but a great example of the power of an endowment and the power of investing over a very long period of time is the Helen McPherson Smith Trust. So in 1951, Helen McPherson Smith left a bequest to support Victorian charities in her will. She left $550,000 at the time, about £275,000. And that was to be invested into perpetuity. So that was 1951, roughly $500,000. Today, in 2026, that's given away over $151 million to charities and is worth $180 million. So that's the power of an endowment. And And it kind of shows the value, that idea of the need to continue to grow it, because $550,000 in 1951 was an enormous amount of money, but in today's terms, it won't get you nearly as far. So that's a great example of the power of growing that corpus, and what that means for the ongoing income that can be distributed to charities. In the Alliance's case, or in the Future Fund's case, that income would be going to the Alliance and the work of the Alliance, for that keeping the lights on work that Emma talked about. If we could achieve just something even close to what the Helen McPherson Smith Trust has achieved, that would be an amazing thing. And it's why we're so excited to be involved in the Alliance and the work in setting up this Futures Fund successfully.
Yeah, good one, Chris. Our next slide there. Yeah, so this is around growth, and you mentioned a bit about growth. So how does and based on this, how do we grow the fund with a particular focus around investing in the market's returns over time? How does the fund keep growing and generating money for the Alliance every year without eating into the original 30 million?
Absolutely. So to do that, we need to produce an investment return that allows for that distribution to the Alliance, plus a little bit more, so that we're growing the fund at or above inflation, or the rising cost of goods and services. So to do that, we will be investing the futures funds into investment markets, and creating a portfolio of investments, so a number of investments, with the expectation that when we make those investments, we will grow those investments over time. So when you invest, you're essentially buying a small stake in something. So that might be a company, it might be a small stake in a loan to government, or a company. It may be a piece of real estate or property, and you're hoping that small stake will grow in value, or you'll get paid income along the way, or it will do both. It will grow in value and pay you income. The businesses or the governments that you're providing that money to, what you're essentially doing is giving them access to that money, and what they provide you in return is a share in the profit or success that they have, or they pay you income for the privilege of using your money. And that's essentially what investing is. And what we would be looking to do is to build a framework that will allow the Futures Fund to invest prudently, so that it achieves its long-term investment targets. But importantly, we want to do that with the least amount of risk possible, because when you do invest, there is an element of risk, and that's why you're rewarded by these companies in the form of a return or income. So that's part of the work that we're doing at the moment, is to work with the task force to determine what's the optimal return that we're looking for and what's the risk we're willing to take to achieve that return.
And that's a good conduit to the next one about the risks. So what are the risks? We know that markets don't always perform well. So if there's a bad year, what does that mean for the Alliance operations, and what protections exist to manage that risk?
Absolutely. So the reality is, anyone who watches the news knows that investment markets go up and down, and there are risks associated with them. Importantly, investments don't all come in one size, shape or form. So some investments have more risk than others. Typically, those with more risk, you can expect a higher return for your investment. Those with less risk, often a lower return. And the important thing that we will be doing when we form the investment strategy for the Futures Fund is creating a basket of investments that have different forms of risks associated with them. If there is a year where markets are down and fall, or the Futures Fund receives less income. That may happen from time to time, but we will ensure that the right protections are in place. That's good governance. We firmly believe that success and failure when investing in endowment often comes down to having good governance in place. That means really sound risk management frameworks. It means focusing on the long term, not the short term. And really carefully managing the money. One of the things that you can do to protect yourself is to have lots of different things in the portfolio, and this is called diversification, so that you aren't relying on one single investment to do well all the time. The way I like to think about diversification is kind of like putting together a sports team. You want to have different players with different skill sets doing different roles in a sports team. And that's how I like to think about investing, so that when we invest, if one asset isn't doing well, we want to make sure that there are other investments that are doing well at that time. So they're all contributing in different ways, and what that does is reduces the risk for the overall portfolio. And we will have protection mechanisms in place so that if there is a bad year for the futures fund, that we already have the right, the cash there, the ability to support the operations through those periods, knowing that we're investing for the long term.
Good one. And this is the one, keeping the lights on. So I might bring yourself into it too, Emma. So yeah, how much do we need to keep the lights on each year? So yeah, what return does the fund need to generate for the Alliance to keep the lights on each year? And where does it sit on the spectrum between keeping the money safe and chasing higher returns?
Yeah, I'll tackle the first part of that before handing back over to Chris, maybe. But yeah, I guess how much does it take to keep the lights on? It's a very good question. And I suppose some of it relates to when it's, how long's a piece of string to some extent, but also it really will reflect what we want the Alliance to do at the end of the day. So when we're still working through the last of our feedback on, the purpose and vision and functions, I guess, of the Alliance. But from what we've heard, and Mel mentioned a little bit earlier on there around the leading model, which is out for final comment at the moment until the 30th of June. But what we've heard pretty loud and clear is that, it will have a function around that collective power to influence policy reform and systems change and things like that. So looking at, what are the big issues in the reef for traditional owners that could really move the dial, and coming up with policy positions and really going out there and advocating for change on those things at a collective, regional level, whole of reef level. So, I guess some of the things that ReefTO is doing as well includes action, delivering actions that are under the traditional owner implementation plan. And it could well be that the Alliance has a role to play in that respect as well. So things like, supporting the next generation of young reef leaders to learn those governance skills and to strengthen their capability in becoming policy leaders and advocates for change for sea country governance and rights and management and things like that. So I guess what we're trying to model at the moment is at least what the core governance and administration of the Alliance would look like to fulfill those basic functions that we've heard are the most important, which is that policy reform and systems change, advocacy, and challenging, I suppose, the powers that be in how traditional owners have that seat at the table and want to be, will be part of that change, I guess. So we are working through some modelling at the moment, but what we're very much hoping is that core kind of governance and those core functions. And when I say core governance, I mean the board of directors and the other sort of governance bodies that will sit alongside that. So things like the Elders Council that we've heard very strongly will be, a core component of the Alliance, and the Youth Council, which will be, bringing in that youth perspective and another, I guess, dimension to the development of the next generation of young reef leaders. So when you look at the board of directors, which we're assuming, and based on what we've heard, will have sort of regional clusters. So in other words, directors drawn from each region who will sit on the board and govern the whole organisation. So bringing that board of directors together on a regular basis for 4 to 6 meetings per year. Same thing with the Elders Council, same thing with the Youth Council, plus an organisational leader like a CEO and a secretariat and things like that, and the sort of costs that go alongside that. So things like insurance, your corporate fees to be regulated under ASIC or whatever it might be, and the Australian Charities not-for-profit commission, things like that. All of those costs we're modelling right now, but we're very much hoping the annual return from the Futures Fund will cover all those things so that we don't have to go looking for those core costs. But I might hand over to Chris to talk about, what you sort of can expect when markets go up and down, perhaps, and how we ride that wave, I guess, over time. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So typically for an endowment similar to the Futures Fund, often what you'll find is that those two things that I talked about before, growing the investment amount plus the annual distribution to the alliance, typically you'll be looking at around a 4% distribution to the organisation, and you can do that reasonably sustainably. So that's the keeping the lights on money for the alliance. And then the growing the corpus component, the second component, you're looking to do that at around about the level of inflation, which over the long term, a little bit higher today, but over the long term is between 2 or 3%. So you put those two things together, and that's roughly the return that you can expect, 7 or 8% from the Futures Fund over time. Of course, as Emma's pointed to, this is all being worked out at the moment and being settled. So there's a lot of moving parts, but that's typically what you'll find is the investment objective of most endowments.
Thank you. This is a values question. How do we align this with our values? For example, is there flexibility to ensure that the fund is invested in ways that align with reef traditional owners' values? And how would those decisions get made?
Absolutely, Mel. This is a really important question and one that we've been looking into in depth. So absolutely, you can build an investment portfolio or an endowment that is aligned to the values of the alliance and the community. And the priorities of the alliance and the community. When we develop the policies and procedures for the Futures Fund, we'll be making sure that the investments align with community expectations, cultural authority, and the purpose of the alliance, so the protection of the reef, for instance. So they'll be important factors in determining what we invest in and what we don't invest in. Typically, the parameters for that are set through the governance decision-making processes, the policies that are put in place. And we'll also be looking for investments that really strongly align to the alliance and the community as well. So that's the really exciting part of investing the corpus, is not only are we looking to avoid things that don't align, but we can support things that do align with community expectations and the purpose and mission of the alliance. So absolutely something that can be done and will be done. In terms of how that will take place in a practical sense, there's likely to be an internal committee that will be advising the board. That's yet to be established. That may be supported by experts in this space who have experience in managing portfolios that are aligned to non-profit organisations and community organisations and their values. And the decision-making protocols will be in place so that absolutely at all times the investments will be aligned to the Alliance and what it's trying to achieve.
Beautiful. Right. Governance. What does governance look like, and how do we protect investments? We know that the 30 million won't be released until the Alliance is established and protections are in place. I think it was mentioned earlier there, Emma, there. But what does good governance look like, and what measures can be put in place to protect investment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said before, from our experience, good governance is the key to good investment management of an endowment. That starts and finishes with governance and the work you put into putting the right structures and frameworks in place to set you up for success for the long term. Good governance, for me, means really clear decision-making roles, strong oversight. For the Alliance and the Futures Fund, real focus on maintaining cultural authority. Accountability is really essential, and strong rules around how the money will be used and invested. It also means having people with the right skills involved in the process, plus some expert advice where needed, and that's where coders come into the picture for this phase of establishing the governance frameworks. In terms of kind of practical protections that can be included, typically there will be a board-approved investment policy that is in place. That investment policy will set out a lot of the things that we've talked about today. What are we trying to achieve? What objectives are we trying to achieve from a return perspective? What risks are we willing to take to achieve that? What ethical overlay will we put across the portfolio so that we're investing in line with the Alliance and its expectations and purpose? It will have strong risk controls within it and ensure that there's strong frameworks around reporting back to the board, reporting back to the community, and often it will include the appointment of experts to manage the money as well. So investment managers who will manage the money within that policy and governance framework. So for me, that's what best practice looks like. And ultimately, it will be the board that will be responsible for those policies, procedures and committees, and will have the ultimate oversight of what the Futures Fund is doing.
Right, awesome. And our next slide. So yeah, this is an opportunity now to for any questions that can be added into the chat, and definitely moderators will then select or choose to discuss. Is there any questions coming from the chat?
Hey Mel, yes, we've got a couple of questions coming through here. Really great presentation. Just a question around, so if the Alliance gets stood up and that 30 million gets released once those protections are in place, can MOB apply for funding from the Futures Fund? Like, how does that work?
Cool. Yeah, I might tackle that one. So no, I guess no, not as such. So the way it's being structured is that, going back to that keep the lights on piece we talked about there before. So at least initially, with this corpus, I suppose, of funding, so this bucket of funds being the 30 million, where its purpose is really to keep the lights on for the Alliance. So to fund the core governance, which is that board of directors, the Elders Council, the Youth Council, the committees that sit alongside it, like the Audit and Risk Committee and things like that, and those core functions being that policy reform and advocacy piece and, systems change functions of the Alliance. So at least because, Chris talked there before about the expectation of distribution to the Alliance being around that 4%. That's not a lot each year. from 30 million. But I guess what I can say is that we're looking at not only growing it in the way Chris talked about with by setting aside 2 to 3% per year to keep in line with inflation so that it grows in that sort of organic way. But we're also looking to fundraise to significantly increase the amount in the Futures Fund. And so I guess as we grow that, so that we've sort of got some plans in place or targets in place, I guess, the plan's still to take some shape and the strategy around it all, but some targets around doubling that, at least doubling the amount in the Futures Fund. And I guess as that grows, then there might be some changes to what those funds are used for. So it might be that if we're able to double it, then the distribution from the doubled part could be available to traditional owners to apply for and things like that. So the sort of policy settings around that is still to come once the target is met around at least doubling, as I mentioned. And I think once the alliance gets set up and gets more familiar with markets in this way and has those connections with groups like Coda Capital and things like that, we can start to explore other types of funds that are even more innovative. Like there's so much happening in innovative finance and different forms of impact investment and things like that, that there's so much that we could look at for opening up all sorts of pathways in the future. But at least for now, we've got to start somewhere, and that is with the standing up of the alliance, hopefully at the end of this year, that we'll at least have the core costs of that covered, so that we can then use that core as a springboard to launch into exploring other things and building more funds, I guess, for different purposes.
Yeah, that's a really clear explanation. Thank you, Em. I have another question that's come through in the chat. So with this Futures Fund, does that mean that less money flows through to mob on the ground? And does that mean that people will have to compete for funding?
I might tackle this one too. Yeah, so no, not at all. And I touched earlier on, that being a really core principle that's been really important to the task force all the way along, and that we've heard, I suppose, emphasised to us through the regional dialogue and engagement process, is that it shouldn't compete. We should do everything we can to ensure the alliance doesn't compete with local groups on the ground for funding. So there's lots of buckets of funding that obviously get released by government and different funding agencies and things like that throughout the year and over the course of time. So things like ranger funding, IPA funding, water quality improvement funding, all those sorts of things. So that will all continue to exist. So by setting up this Futures Fund and having that regular stream of secured in perpetuity funding means we don't have to compete in any of those ways. So it does provide that level of independence and autonomy, and as I mentioned before as well, that ability to have that arm's length relationship so that we can criticise when we need to and not be worried about being silenced. But it shouldn't interfere at all. It won't interfere at all with any group's usual funding streams. Yeah.
Thanks, Emma. And with this next question, you've partially answered it in the answer that you gave to that one, but does that mean that the Alliance would be administering contracts and handing out grants if and when it gets set up?
No, that's not what will happen. No. So especially all those, there's lots of groups out there with contracts with government partners and things like that. That will continue to exist. This is like the work of the Alliance, I guess, is set up to be of collective benefit and are bringing groups together to understand what those bigger pieces are that could really, as I mentioned, sort of move the dial from a policy reform point of view and systems change point of view. But those contracts will continue to exist. It's not part of the plan that the Alliance would administer funding on behalf of those agencies or anything like that. So not a gatekeeper type role at all. It's purely for collective benefit and that sort of collective power and collective voice together to amplify the voices and the aspirations of traditional owners in the reef space. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. And last question here is, how will Mob know if the fund is performing well, and how will everybody be kept informed and in the loop on a regular basis about what's happening with the fund?
Yeah, well, I might hand over to Chris for this one, but I think, and I guess to even frame that, maybe to Chris a little bit more detail is what would you expect would be normal in terms of, performance and progress reports of the fund? Like, is it a quarterly thing, or how? Like, definitely an annual report, I imagine, would be at the very least. But what sort of normal cycle of reporting, and what does that look like, do you think, Chris?
Absolutely. So traditionally with a endowment fund, we're working with a committee of the board. Often that's called an investment committee, but it can take different shapes and sizes. But typically we would be reporting into them on a quarterly basis, how the endowment has performed. Within the policies and the frameworks that you set for the Futures Fund, there will be some benchmarks set within them, and those benchmarks will be used to assess how the portfolio has gone. So as part of that quarterly update to the committee, there will be an assessment of how the portfolio is tracking against those benchmarks. And obviously there's what we would call the mission benchmark, which is your overall return objective, and looking at how, not in the short term, but in the long term, have you performed against that? Have you been able to grow the fund at the amount you wanted to grow it at? And have you been able to distribute the amount you needed to distribute back to the organisation over the long term? So they're the assessments at a high level that you'd be looking at. Often there is an annual report that goes to the board as well. And in the case of the Futures Fund, there will be a communication plan in place for communicating back to traditional owners and community about the performance of the endowment and the investments and what's been achieved through the Futures Fund.
Cool. So yeah, I think Chris answered that really well, I think. So I guess, yeah, the investment committee, as part of the board of directors, would receive those regular reports, and then it will be up to the Alliance to distribute those to the member organisations and to ensure that's really transparent, and that, as Chris mentioned, would be part of the communications plan around that, alongside all other performance reporting of the organisation as well, including overall impact and how we're tracking against a strategy. I mean, most likely would have an annual strategy and a 3-year strategy as well, and the Alliance would regularly report on that as well. So not only the Futures Fund piece, but also the plans that are put in place by the members and the organisation. So yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. That's all the questions.
Cool.
Well, yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, go for it, Mel. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say thanks to all the questions and answering those questions too, Chris and Emma. But hey, I just want to thank everyone for participating here today and their time spent online and sharing this, and for the viewers online too, please share this amongst family and friends, mob. And just some reminders too, so that our next webinar series, and the title is Deciding Together the Future Alliance, and that'll be scheduled Wednesday, 15th of July from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. And it'll also include a summary of the entire ReefTO journey, where we've been, what we've heard, and what comes next. Sounds like a movie.
Might be a long one.
It might be a long one.
Bring the popcorn.
Yep, so that sounds like a country song too, yeah. As we head towards the ReefTO Summit in September, so this is fairly significant. So, but also just to remind everyone too that the leading model is out for formal comment until 30th of June. So get in and make comment to that. We're almost there. We just need your help to finalise it. And that's so you can check us out, provide your feedback on our website, which is reefto.au. /leading-model to have your say. And note too, this recording will be distributed along with questions and answered, and any unanswered will be forwarded on as well as part of the written response. And then finally, please sign up to our newsletter and connect with us socially. Let's stay connected and let's stay deadly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mel.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Mel.
Chris.